In the spring of 1997, the world watched in confusion as a European nation situated just 45 miles from the coast of Italy dissolved into total anarchy. It wasn't an invasion by a foreign power, nor was it a religious coup. Instead, the chaos was ignited by something far more bizarre. Within a matter of weeks, the government had fallen, the military had deserted, and citizens had looted over 650,000 weapons from army depots. Kalashnikovs were being sold on street corners for as little as $5, and 2,000 people lay dead in the streets. The cause of this madness? The entire population had invested their life savings, their homes, and their livestock into a series of Ponzi schemes that promised to make them rich overnight. When the bubble inevitably burst, it didn't just bankrupt the people, it dissolved the state itself. This is the story of Albania, a nation that went from being the most isolated country on earth to the victim of the most catastrophic financial mania in history. To understand how an entire population could fall for such an obvious scam, we first have to look at the psychological state of the country. For 40 years following the end of World War II, Albania was ruled by the iron fist of Enver Hoxha. Hoxha was a paranoid Stalinist dictator who eventually decided that even the Soviet Union and China were too liberal. He hermetically sealed the country off from the rest of the world. Private property was outlawed, religion was banned, owning a car was illegal. Paranoid that the world was coming to destroy him, Hoxha spent billions of dollars constructing 173,000 concrete bunkers across the countryside, one for every 4 citizens, while the population lived in abject poverty. For decades, Albanians had zero experience with free markets, banking, or financial risk. The state provided everything, and the state controlled everything. When Hoxha died and communism finally collapsed in the early 1990s, the Albanian people were thrust into the chaotic world of capitalism with absolutely no financial literacy. They were eager, optimistic, and dangerously naive. As the new democratic government took power, they initiated rapid privatization, but the banking sector was still archaic, state-owned, and refused to give loans to average citizens. Into this vacuum stepped the foundations. These were ostensibly investment firms, often run by charismatic figures with connections to the new government. They promised to take your money and return it with interest. At first, the rates were modest, perhaps 4 or 5% a month. But as competition between these funds grew, the promises became mathematically impossible. By 1996, some funds were offering interest rates of 10% per month. Others promised to double your money in 3 months. In a country where the average monthly wage was around $80, the allure was irresistible. Early investors were paid out using the money from new investors, the classic structure of a pyramid scheme. But because the early adopters were seen driving new Mercedes-Benzes and building villas, the mania spread like a virus. Farmers sold their cattle, families sold their homes and moved into rental apartments, investing the cash to live off the interest. Remittances sent home from Albanians working in Greece and Italy were dumped straight into the funds. By late 1996, the frenzy reached its peak. The nominal value of the liabilities in these schemes amounted to $1.2 billion, a figure that was nearly half of Albania's entire gross domestic product. It is estimated that 2/3 of the entire population had invested in these schemes. You might ask, where was the government? Why didn't the regulators step in? The tragedy of Albania was that the government wasn't just watching, they were cheering it on. The ruling Democratic Party, facing an election in 1996, didn't want to pop the bubble that was making their voters feel rich. Government officials appeared on television endorsing the funds as a sign of Albania's vigorous new capitalist economy. It was later revealed that many high-ranking officials and ministers were personally invested in the schemes or were receiving kickbacks to look the other way. The IMF and the World Bank issued frantic warnings, telling the government to shut down the funds before they collapsed. The government ignored them, claiming that Albanians were simply better at business than the rest of Europe. But mathematics is a cruel mistress. In January 1997, the inevitable happened. Two of the largest funds, Suja and Jalika, declared bankruptcy. The panic was instantaneous. Thousands of angry investors gathered outside the fund headquarters demanding their money. When the doors remained locked, the protests turned violent. As the other funds cascaded into default, the realization hit: the money was gone. The anger shifted from the fund managers to the government that had endorsed them. Protests in the southern cities of Vlorë and Lushnja transformed into armed insurrections. Police stations were burned, government buildings were stormed, but the situation escalated from a riot to a civil war when the protesters stormed the military armories. The conscript soldiers, who had also lost their savings in the schemes, largely deserted. They left the doors to the weapons depots wide open. Civilians helped themselves to millions of rounds of ammunition, grenades, and assault rifles. By March 1997, the government had lost control of the entire South. Criminal gangs and local warlords took over, seizing control of towns. The president declared a state of emergency, but it was too late. The state had withered away. For 4 months, Albania was a lawless zone. Naval ships were hijacked by refugees trying to flee to Italy. High school students patrolled neighborhoods with machine guns. The United Nations was forced to authorize a multinational military protection force, Operation Alba, just to secure aid deliveries and restore basic order. When the dust finally settled in late 1997, the toll was staggering. The economy had contracted by 10%, the currency had collapsed, and thousands of lives had been lost in the senseless violence. A new socialist government was elected, tasked with the humiliating job of telling the population that their money was gone forever. Today, Albania has largely recovered. It is a NATO member and a candidate for the European Union, with a growing tourism industry along its beautiful coastline. The concrete bunkers of Enver Hoxha are now used as cafes, museums, or storage sheds, scars of a paranoid past. But the scars of 1997 remain. The pyramid scheme crisis serves as a brutal lesson in the dangers of rapid economic transition without institutional guardrails. It proved that when a government fails to protect its citizens from their own greed and naivety, the social contract doesn't just break, it explodes. In the end, the people of Albania learned the hardest lesson of capitalism. If an opportunity looks too good to be true, it probably is.